My name is Leonard Hayes, and I'm 62 years old. I spent most of my life believing that love meant sacrifice. Quiet sacrifice, the kind you don't keep score on. When my wife, Alana, shared her dream of becoming a therapist, I pushed my own ambitions aside without a second thought. I took extra shifts, picked up the slack at home, and carried both of our lives on my back because I believed in her future more than I believed in my own. But years go by and dreams change people. When I finally found something I wanted, a small community program I hoped to start, she didn't cheer the way I once did for her. She dismissed me, and somewhere in that moment I realized our partnership had turned into a one-way street. This is the story of how I stopped asking for her approval and started choosing myself. I still remember the earliest years of our marriage like they happened last week. Back then, it was just me and Alana in a little apartment with thin walls and loud neighbors. We didn't have much hand-me-down furniture, a sagging sofa, a kitchen table that wobbled every time I leaned on it. But it felt like home because we were building something together. Alana had a dream long before I ever met her. She wanted to be a therapist. Not the glamorous kind you see on TV, but the kind who sits with real people, listens, and tries to help them untangle the knots in their lives. She carried that dream like a precious thing, tucked close to her heart. And when we married, it became our dream. At least, that's how I saw it. Money was tight. I was working at an auto shop during the day and doing late-night maintenance work at a school across town. Some nights I'd get home close to midnight and find Alana sitting at the kitchen table in her robe. Textbooks spread out everywhere, her face tired but glowing with determination. Sometimes she would look up at me with red eyes and say, "Baby, I don't think I can do this." And I would take her hands, those small, warm hands, and say, "You can. And I've got you. We're going to make this work." I didn't know if I had the energy to say those words every night, but I said them anyway. Because loving someone sometimes means giving them strength you don't even have yourself. There were nights she cried quietly, thinking I couldn't hear. Nights she whispered to herself, "What if I fail?" And every time I heard that fear in her voice, I pushed myself a little harder the next day. Picked up an extra shift. Skipped lunch to save a few dollars. Put off buying the new work boots I needed. Told my buddies I couldn't hang out because I needed to be home in case she needed a pep talk. It wasn't sacrifice to me, not then. It was partnership. The first time she passed one of her big exams, she came running into the living room, nearly knocking over a lamp, and she jumped into my arms. I still remember her laughter. Pure, relieved, overflowing joy. She kept saying, "We did it, Leonard. We did it." That's how she always phrased it back then. We got her through school. We pushed through the nights. We carried the dream together. And I believed it. I believed every syllable. A year later, when she got the chance to do her graduate studies, we had a tough talk at the table. Tuition was more than we expected. Way more. She stared at the numbers with her head in her hands, whispering that maybe she should just give up and settle for something else. But I couldn't let her do that. Not after everything she'd already worked for. So I said, "I'll take on more hours. We'll tighten up. We'll find a way." And we did. Or maybe I did, if I'm being honest. I took on so many shifts the manager at the shop used to joke that I lived there. I'd nod and pretend to laugh, too tired to explain the truth. That every extra hour bought Alana another chapter, another exam, another step toward becoming the woman she dreamed of being. She always told me she was grateful. And I believed her. She would come sit beside me while I ate reheated leftovers after a long late shift, rubbing my shoulders and whispering, "You're my hero." Those were good years. Hard years, but good. When she finally graduated and landed her first real position at a local counseling center, I remember standing in the back during her little ceremony. Her parents, her sisters, her friends, all of them were there cheering. But when she spotted me across the room, her eyes lit up in a way that made every long shift worth it. She mouthed, "Thank you." And in that moment, I felt like the proudest man alive. Her career took off faster than either of us expected. Suddenly she had colleagues, meetings, workshops, clients calling at all hours. She was passionate, focused, excited. And I was proud. Truly proud. I used to tell people, my wife helps folks get their lives together. She changes lives. But somewhere in the middle of her rising success, something subtle began to shift. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't hit all at once. It crept in slowly, like fog rolling over the ground. She started coming home later, not because she didn't care, but because she had so much on her plate. I found myself eating dinner alone more nights than not. I'd be sitting in the living room, watching the clock, telling myself, she's just busy. This is a good thing. And it was for her. One afternoon I came home early, sore from a long week, and found her on the phone talking to one of her colleagues about a workshop she'd been invited to. She didn't see me standing there in the doorway. She was glowing, pacing the room with excitement, talking about the opportunities ahead. When she hung up, she finally noticed me and said, "Oh, didn't hear you come in." Just that. Simple words. But something in her tone felt different. Not unkind. Not sharp. Just distant. I brushed it off. People change when they're growing. That's what I told myself. But the distance kept growing. She began talking about things I didn't understand, clinical techniques, conferences, publications. And though I tried to keep up, I could feel myself slipping into the background of her life. Like wallpaper. I'd ask about her day, and she'd give me the highlights, always rushing to the next thought. Meanwhile, when I tried to tell her something about work or life, she'd nod politely, but her mind was somewhere else. We'd lie in bed at night with her scrolling through emails or responding to messages while I stared up at the ceiling wondering when our paths had stopped running side by side. I didn't resent her back then. I want to make that clear. I loved watching her succeed. But I also started noticing something I never expected. My world shrinking. The friends I used to see drifted away because I wasn't around much during her school years. My hobbies had faded because I spent so long focusing on paying bills and keeping our lives afloat. And now, even with more time, I didn't know what I enjoyed anymore. It was like I'd handed her our shared dream and forgotten to save even a small piece of one for myself. One evening, while she was preparing a talk for a seminar, I walked past her office door and saw her surrounded by papers, highlighters, books, and a glowing laptop screen. Her brow was tight with focus, her lips moving as she practiced lines under her breath. I stood there for a moment, watching her, and something warm mixed with something lonely inside my chest. Warm because I was proud. Lonely because I realized her world had grown bigger than anything I'd ever be part of again. I stepped away quietly so she wouldn't see me. That night, when she finally climbed into bed hours after midnight, she kissed my cheek and said, "Thanks for being so patient with me." I smiled and told her, "Always." And I meant it. Back then I meant it. But if I'm honest, that was the first time I felt the quiet tug of something changing between us. Not a break. Not a betrayal. Just a drift. A slow drift that neither of us talked about because we were both too busy building a life that no longer looked the same to both of us. I didn't know it yet, but that feeling, that quiet tug, was the beginning of the road that would take us exactly where we ended up. I used to joke that my hands knew the house better than I did. I learned the rhythm of it. The mornings that needed coffee on the table before Alana left, the evenings when the sink waited for a dish that never quite made it to the dishwasher, the little chores that keep a life from fraying at the edges. I took care of those things the way some people tend to garden. Regular, steady, hardly noticed until one day the plants are gone and you wonder when it happened. When Alana's career accelerated, it felt at first like a tide lifting both of us. She was buoyed by opportunities, and I was proud. I liked the way people listened to her now, the respect she earned in rooms she once only dreamed about. But while she moved through conference halls and clinical rounds, I was home making sure our bills were paid on time, making appointments, making sure the dryer didn't swallow anyone's socks. It was ordinary work, the kind that never shows up on a resume, but without which everything else collapses. I learned to cook. Not because I loved it, though some nights I surprised myself, but because it mattered. There's a difference between meals and meals you leave on the counter for someone to reheat after midnight. I started buying vegetables Alana would eat on a good day, and soup for nights when she was exhausted. I left notes on the fridge, reminders of meds, where the tax papers were, little anchors for two lives that had begun to drift out of sync. Our home became my primary project. I fixed the leaky faucet that had been dripping since the winter before her promotion. I sorted the mail that came for both of us and filed the insurance forms she'd need when she finally had time to look at them. I answered the calls from contractors and scheduled the dentist appointments. I handled the people who needed handling. The neighbor who forgot to move his car for street cleaning, the utility company who sent the wrong bill. None of these things were glamorous. None came with applause. But they kept the world around us moving. At first she noticed. She'd come home and say, "How did you find the time?" And the way she said it made me feel like a secret hero. But over time, the gratitude became less frequent. She began to walk through the rooms with a quicker step, a mind already halfway in her next phone call. And the little thank you that used to rest on her lips would be swallowed by an email notification. Her days changed. She started taking on evening clients, then weekend workshops. She developed a new vocabulary, clinical terms and faculty names, that I learned the way you learn useless trivia, in bits, with a shrug. Her friends were different now, people who spoke in case studies and published papers. They had lives mapped out on calendars and grant deadlines. When she told me about a conference in a city I'd barely heard of, I'd listen like a good husband, asking questions and trying to be interested because I was. I loved that she loved her work. I loved the fierceness I'd first fallen for. But sometimes I'd find myself in the quiet of our kitchen after she'd left for another long day, wondering where the path we'd been building together had split. I didn't complain. Complaining felt small next to what she'd earned. So I made the bed and paid the bills and fixed the burnt-out bulb in the hallway. I became the household's invisible scaffolding, present, necessary, and unnoticed. There's a particular ache to that kind of invisibility. You keep doing the thing that makes everything else possible, and even as you take pride in it, it starts to hollow you out a little. It's a quiet erosion, a wearing of the edges of who you are. There were moments that cracked me open if I let them. The anniversary that slipped by because she had to prepare a lecture the next day. I'd set out a bottle of the wine we used to share and a note folded by her plate. She kissed me on the forehead and left a voicemail from the airport 2 days later, apologizing and promising to make it up. "We'll celebrate when I'm back," she said. "We will." I waited by the door the night she returned, and she unpacked her bag and sat on the couch scrolling through messages. She was tired, of course she was, but she seemed tired in a way that excluded me. I swallowed the disappointment and made her tea. There was the small, humiliating thing of being the only one in the room at a center event who wasn't wearing a name badge with initials after a degree. I stood at the back and watched her move through colleagues who called her by her last name, as if respect was a new suit she had put on. When she waved over to me, I tried to smile like I belonged there, but the conversations around me had a cadence I didn't know. They mentioned studies and journals and acronyms, and I felt, for the first time, not just out of place, but like a character in the wrong play. We argued once about the simplest thing, decorating. She wanted to bring in new furniture for the office she'd been given, and she asked if she could use some of the living room budget. I hesitated. It was a silly fight, small and sharp in all the wrong places. She said, "Leonard, it's for the house." I said, "It's also for us." She looked at me the way someone looks at something they're trying to fold into a bag that's already full of other things. I felt dismissed, not angrily, not cruelly, but firmly, as if I'd asked for something childish. That one look took longer to heal than any other bruise. People asked me how it felt. "Aren't you proud?" they'd say. "She's doing so well." And I would be. I still was. Pride is a steady light in a man's chest. But pride doesn't fix loneliness. Pride doesn't cook the dinner, or remember the dentist, or call the repairman on a Tuesday. Pride is quiet company, but it's not the same as being seen. Every so often I'd try to bridge the growing space between us. I'd find a recipe I thought she might like, and insist we try it together. We'd sit at the table and talk about her day, and she'd tell me about a client breakthrough or a major grant, and I would listen and try to celebrate. I wanted to be part of the joy she found at work, to watch her glow. But sometimes her joy came with an edge of distance, like a voice feverishly reaching forward while the other hand kept reaching back. I missed the small things most. The way she used to leave her shoes by the door and forget to take the mail in on rainy days. The way she would hum while folding laundry. Those tiny, human habits made up the map I navigated with love. When they disappeared, I started looking for their shadows. She stopped leaving notes, stopped laughing at the same things on TV. Her wardrobe changed. She wore blazers now instead of the sweaters I'd bought her on cold days. There were new routines she'd picked up, morning yoga, late-night reading groups, that didn't include me. I kept telling myself balance would return. She was in a phase, I thought. Perhaps when she landed the director position she was aiming for, she'd slow down. Or perhaps once the newness of success settled, she'd look for the familiar face at home. Those were hopeful thoughts, the kind you tell yourself when you don't want to confront a hard truth. But cracks formed not in the thunderous moments, but in the small, unattended ones. A missed call I didn't return because I was fixing the washing machine. A plate left in the sink with no note. Invitations to events where she smiled and introduced me as Leonard, my husband, in a tone that felt like a footnote. I started to feel like an accessory in scenes that once belonged to us both. There were nights I'd sit alone on the porch with a beer, listening to the house settle, and remember the early years when we were a team in every sense. I remembered holding her through tears and cheering for her when she passed exams. I remembered the way her eyes would search for mine in a crowd, and how that look used to say that no matter what, we were in it together. I held on to those memories because they were proof that something true had existed between us. But memories don't pay the light bill. They don't make coffee in the mornings. They don't iron shirts or call to reschedule a doctor. One afternoon, while she was at a staff retreat, I sat at our kitchen table with a stack of unpaid notices. I organized them and called the companies and mapped out a budget like a man who was still trying to be the provider in the way he knew best. When she returned, she found the envelopes neatly filed and a pot of soup on the stove. She kissed my cheek and said, "You always do so much." She didn't ask how I'd managed it or whether it had been hard. She moved on to tell me about a presentation, and I listened, the way I always had. That night I lay awake and realized I had been keeping the house together for so long that I didn't know if I remembered how to ask for help. I had built systems to run on my own, so I wouldn't have to bring up how invisible I felt. I had become the silent machinery in our life, efficient, uncomplaining, and increasingly irrelevant. Still, I believed in the return of balance. That belief is stubborn. It kept me patient. It kept me from making a scene when small slights accumulated into something that felt like neglect. I wanted to believe our shared history would be enough to bring us back. But there are times when history is not a bridge, and patience just becomes waiting in a room where the other person has already left. As the months folded into years, the cracks kept getting hairlines longer. They'd widen in the neutral spaces, the kitchen counter, the couch, the calendar on the wall. Each little omission, each overlooked moment added up like raindrops filling a basin. I kept bailing with towels and buckets, hoping the tide would turn, hoping she would notice the wet floor and step in to help. The hope made me gentle. The small betrayals made me quieter. And somewhere in that quiet, I began to wonder what it would mean to reclaim a life that had been given away in service of another person's dream. I didn't wake up one morning with some grand, burning dream that demanded my attention. It didn't come with fireworks or some revelation that knocked me off my feet. It came quietly, like most important things do, especially later in life. It came in the shape of a memory, really. A memory of being a young man in my 20s, full of energy I didn't appreciate back then, thinking about how I wanted to help kids who grew up the way I did. Kids who needed someone to look at them and say, "There's more out there for you, and I'll show you how to reach it." That idea never quite left, even through all the years of working, paying bills, supporting Alana, and doing everything a husband is supposed to do. It stayed tucked away like a letter in a drawer, waiting for the day someone remembered to open it. When retirement started coming into view, not right around the corner, but close enough to see it on the horizon, I felt something inside me shift. It wasn't panic or dread. It was more like a breath, a long exhale after decades of holding one in. I realized that if I didn't try something for myself now, I never would. I would leave this world having lived a life that served everyone but me. I didn't want a grand business or some late-in-life quest to prove myself. I wanted something simple, something helpful, something that felt like it belonged to me. Mentoring kids, especially the ones who slipped through the cracks, felt like a way to pour meaning into the years I had left. Not to be praised, not to be some hero, just to make a dent in the kind of world I grew up in. It wasn't a polished plan. Not yet. It was just an idea I held in my chest for weeks. I researched small community programs during my lunch breaks. I watched videos online about how to start a youth mentorship network. I even wrote down 3 names of kids in my neighborhood I thought could use someone steady to talk to. It felt good. It felt like purpose. And for the first time in years, I felt a kind of excitement, like I was reconnecting with the younger version of myself, the one who had dreams before life taught him to be practical. I practiced how I'd tell Alana. That might sound silly, but after years of her being the one with the big goals, the one with the spotlight, I'd almost forgotten how to talk about myself without shrinking. I chose a night when she wasn't too tired, rare, but I waited. I cooked dinner, lit a candle, made it all feel like a moment. We sat across from each other at the table, and I tried to ease into it naturally. I told her I'd been thinking about what came next for me. I told her this program could be small, maybe just a group that met a few nights a week. I told her I knew it was late in life to be starting something new, but that I felt called to it in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. She didn't respond right away. She didn't smile or look curious or even ask a question. She laughed. Not a cruel laugh. Not loud or mocking, but a short, dismissive laugh. The kind someone gives when something catches them off guard, and they don't bother hiding how little they think of it. Mentorship, she said, wiping the corner of her mouth like she'd just heard something mildly amusing. At your age? Leonard, that's unrealistic. That's something people do earlier in their careers, not when they're winding down. I felt that laugh in my bones. It was a small crack, sharp and sudden, right under my ribs. She didn't even see it happen. She was already moving on, talking about her day, something about a new case and a meeting with a supervisor. I sat there with my fork halfway to my mouth, hearing her voice but not really listening anymore. My dream, small, gentle, personal, was dismissed in 3 seconds flat. It made me wonder how long she'd stopped seeing me as someone with aspirations at all. Someone who could still grow. Someone who deserved to. I tried again, later that same night, to explain that it didn't have to be big or complicated. I told her it wasn't about starting a nonprofit or turning it into some big project. Just me, one man, helping kids who needed help. She sighed like the conversation was a chore. Leonard, don't make things harder on yourself than they need to be. Just enjoy your retirement when it comes. Travel, relax. Don't start something that's just going to burn you out at your age. At your age. Not at this stage of life, or with your experience. Not even because you're tired. At your age. It felt like a door closing. Not slammed shut, just gently pushed until the latch clicked. A tiny sound that told me I wasn't welcome in the world of dreams anymore. I nodded, because that's what I'd trained myself to do over the years. I nodded and let the conversation dissolve. She went to bed early, and I stayed in the kitchen long after the lights were off, sitting in the dark with my hands clasped in front of me. It wasn't anger I felt. Not at first. It was grief. Quiet, old grief. The kind you feel when you realize someone doesn't see you anymore. Not the version you were. Not the version you are. Not the version you're trying to become. All the years I'd supported her, working double shifts, staying home, sacrificing rest, suddenly felt like they were stacked up behind me, leaning forward. Heavy. Pressing. I wondered if she had ever really known me, or if she had only known the version of me that made her life easier. I thought about those teenagers I wanted to help, about their faces, their struggles, the way someone's belief can change the whole trajectory of a young life. The thought of abandoning that idea, just because she brushed it aside, felt like stepping on something sacred. But I didn't argue with her. Not then. I had learned that sometimes silence protects things more than confrontation does. So I folded the idea back into my chest, not to bury it, but to keep it safe. The next few days were quiet. Not tense. Just quiet. She didn't bring it up again. She probably thought I'd moved on. But something inside me had shifted, a small but undeniable shift. Like the first nudge of a turning tide. The kind that starts invisible before it becomes impossible to ignore. It was the first time in my life that I allowed myself to say, even if only in my own heart, that I had a dream too. And that dream deserved breath. Even if she didn't believe in it. Even if she didn't believe in me. That quiet realization, soft but strong, was the beginning of something I didn't yet have words for. But I could feel it coming, the way you feel a storm before you see the clouds. and it was heading straight for the life we'd built together. I didn't expect things to fall apart in one moment. Life usually isn't that dramatic. Most endings begin quietly, like a slow leak you don't notice until the floor gives way beneath you. Looking back now, I can see all the signs were there long before the night it finally hit me. But at the time, I was still trying to give her the benefit of the doubt. Still trying to believe we were the couple we used to be. After I told Alana about the mentorship program, she shifted into a version of herself that felt more like a supervisor than a wife. Every conversation became a critique. She kept asking what credentials I had, what contacts I planned to use, what metrics I expected to follow. She turned my dream, simple, heartfelt, into a business pitch she had already decided wouldn't pass. "It's not realistic," she kept saying. "You're not thinking things through." But the truth was she wasn't listening. Not really. I could have said I wanted to volunteer at the local church or start a garden or learn to paint. Anything that wasn't in line with the version of life she valued, she would have dismissed just the same. She started using that tone too, the one that made me feel like a child who needed correcting. Not a husband with his own ideas. Not a man with his own path. Then came the suggestion that broke something inside me in a way I'll never forget. One evening, while she was flipping through her planner, she said, "I just think this is a stage in your life where you should be supporting my schedule, not adding something complicated to yours." Supporting her schedule. I'd been doing that my entire adult life. When her career kept her gone until 10 at night, I supported her schedule. When she took every promotion, every conference, every out-of-town workshop, I supported her schedule. When she told me to just be patient while she chased her goals, I supported her schedule. But the moment I wanted something gentle, something good, she expected me to let it go because it didn't fit into the life she had shaped. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just sat back and realized that all the years of sacrifice had twisted into a kind of selfish entitlement I never saw coming. But the moment everything truly snapped into place was a Saturday night. One of those dinners she liked to host for colleagues and friends. The kind where people talk loudly about promotions and wine notes and vacation homes. I usually stayed in the background, making sure everything ran smoothly. That night, I tried to just exist. Sit with them. Be part of something. I shouldn't have tried. It happened after dessert. The conversation drifted toward retirement plans, and someone asked if I had anything in mind. I felt that little spark of pride again, just enough to say, "Actually, I'm thinking about starting a mentorship program for the kids in our neighborhood. Something small, but meaningful." Before I could even finish the sentence, Alana laughed. Not a soft laugh this time. Not the dismissive one from the kitchen. This one was louder, sharper. A laugh that invited other people to laugh with her. And they did. "Oh God," she said, waving her hand in the air. "Don't get him started on that little project. He's been on about it for weeks. It's adorable, really. But totally unrealistic. Adorable. Unrealistic." She said it like I was a man who didn't understand his own life. Like I was someone who needed to be guided away from foolishness. Like I wasn't the person who once worked 2 jobs to keep her dream alive. I felt the heat rise in my chest. Not anger, not embarrassment. Something worse. Disbelief. The room kept laughing. People nodded like they agreed with her. No one looked at me, but they didn't need to. Their laughter told me everything. They saw her version of me. The quiet husband who existed to assist, not aspire. I didn't react. I didn't speak. My fork rested on the table, untouched, while the conversation moved on without me. I remember staring at a candle in the center of the table, watching the flame flicker, thinking how much of my life had been spent keeping someone else's fire burning. I looked at Alana then. Not the woman I married, not the one I held during long nights when she doubted herself, not the one who used to whisper her fears into my chest. I looked at the woman in front of me, confident, polished, surrounded by admirers, and I realized she had outgrown the version of life we once built together. But instead of reaching back for me, she simply stepped over me. And in that moment, something inside me went still. I didn't feel betrayed yet, not the way I would later. I felt alone. Completely, utterly alone. I was sitting in a room full of people, listening to my wife laugh about my dream, and I felt like a stranger in my own home. When the guests left, Alana kissed me on the cheek like nothing was wrong, thanked me for handling the night, and went upstairs before I could open my mouth. I stood in that empty dining room, surrounded by dirty plates and half-filled wine glasses, feeling like the furniture had more presence in her life than I did. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay awake thinking about how easy it had become for her to minimize me. How much of myself I had allowed to shrink so she could shine. How the life we built wasn't really ours anymore. It was hers, with me as a support beam she no longer appreciated. The next morning, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. Really looked. There were lines around my eyes I hadn't noticed. Quiet reminders of years spent bending, carrying, supporting. I barely recognized the man staring back. He looked tired. He looked smaller than he should have been. And that's when the thought came, quiet as a whisper but steady. I don't have to stay here. I don't have to keep shrinking to fit her world. I don't have to abandon my dreams just because she abandoned hers the moment she reached them. It wasn't a plan yet. Not even a decision. Just a truth settling inside me, one I had ignored for far too long. I deserved a life where my dreams mattered too. And for the first time in years, I let myself believe, maybe I could still have one. That tiny shift, that small breath of self-worth. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just alone. I was done being alone in a marriage built for two. I left before the sun even thought about rising. There was no dramatic goodbye, no slammed doors, no note pinned to a pillow. Just me, a small suitcase, and a quiet kind of certainty sitting in my chest like a steady heartbeat. I didn't walk out of that house because I was angry. I walked out because I finally understood something I should have known a long time ago. My life wasn't over just because hers had grown bigger than us. The house was dark when I stepped into the hallway, but it wasn't the heavy darkness I'd grown used to. It felt lighter, almost honest. I paused for a moment at the doorway, looking back at the life I had spent decades shaping around someone else's dreams. There were memories in every corner, good ones, painful ones, ones that didn't fit anymore. I touched the doorframe with the tips of my fingers, a gentle goodbye, and then I stepped out into the cool morning air. The drive had no plan at first. Just miles of open road, soft early light cutting through the windshield, and a stillness I hadn't felt in years. Somewhere along the way, the highway curved toward a quieter area near the river. One of those small towns that only appears on maps if you zoom all the way in. The kind of place where life moves slow, where the loudest sound is a porch screen door or the hum of a boat engine drifting over water. Something inside me said, here. And for the first time in a long while, I listened to myself. I found a small rental, a little one-bedroom place with peeling paint on the porch and a view of the river through a break in the trees. It wasn't much, but it was peaceful. The silence wasn't something I had to earn or fear. It just existed, and for the first time, I didn't feel lonely inside it. I spent the first few days letting myself settle, walking near the water, getting to know the town. Folks down there had a way of looking you in the eye when they talked. Slow, steady conversations that didn't rush to the end. Nobody asked me who I used to be. Nobody treated me like a shadow next to someone brighter. I was just a man trying to start over, and that was enough. One afternoon, I found myself sitting by the river, watching a group of teenagers skipping rocks and joking around. Something clicked. I remembered the mentorship idea, my dream, the one I'd carried quietly for years like a folded-up note in my pocket. I hadn't said the words out loud since the night everything broke inside me. But now, with the water moving gently in front of me and the sun dipping low across the sky, I felt that old spark again. So I walked over to the local community center the next morning. It was a small brick building that looked like it had seen better days, but there was a warmth to it, like every wall had absorbed generations of laughter and arguments in life. I asked if they needed volunteers. The director, a kind woman named Sheila with silver curls and a laugh that made everyone around her join in, looked at me for a moment and said, "I don't know what you've got in mind, but we could use all the help we can get." I told her my idea, simple, honest. A mentorship program for local teens, something steady and reliable. No big promises. Just a safe place for young people who needed someone to listen, someone to guide them a little. She smiled like she'd been waiting years to hear someone say that. Within a week, she had a room set up. A mismatched table, A couple of chairs, a corkboard someone dug out of storage. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And it was mine to build. The first kid who walked in was a boy named Jordan, 15 years old, shoulders slumped like the weight of the world was sitting on his back. He didn't say much at first. Neither did I. We just played a quiet game of checkers. By the end of the hour, he told me he hadn't talked to his dad in months. That was the moment I realized. I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was becoming the kind of man I needed when I was his age. And that felt like meaning. Not the kind that comes from applause or promotions, but the kind that settles deep inside your ribs and expands slowly, filling all the hollow places. Word spread. A few more kids came. Then a few more. The program grew, not because I advertised, but because they kept showing up. They came with questions, fears, dreams they were afraid to say out loud. And every time they talked, I saw pieces of myself. All the years I spent holding back, staying quiet, making myself smaller. I listened to them the way no one had ever really listened to me. Some days, the room was loud with laughter. Other days, it was quiet conversations in the corner. And every day, when I locked up after they left, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Purpose. Not borrowed purpose. Not shared purpose. Not someone else's future I was working to shape. My purpose. One evening, as I was leaving the center, Sheila stopped me at the door. "You know," she said, leaning on the frame, "you've changed this place. And I think it's changing you too." She was right. My shoulders felt lighter. My smile came more naturally. I slept deeper. My body felt like it belonged to me again, not to a life that demanded pieces of me at every turn. I started cooking again, walking by the river every morning, planting small herbs and pots on my porch. Life became simple, but in a way that felt intentional. Peaceful. Like I had finally stepped into the life I was meant to live. Every now and then I'd think about Alana, where she might be if she noticed I was gone. But the thoughts didn't burn anymore. They didn't ache. They just drifted through me like passing clouds. One afternoon, as I sat on my porch watching the river turn gold in the sunset, I realized something. I didn't leave my marriage out of bitterness. I left because I finally understood that choosing myself wasn't betrayal. It was healing. And maybe, for the first time in my life, I was finally whole. The next part of my journey was waiting just around the corner, though I didn't know it yet. But I could feel it, like a soft shift in the air, a quiet invitation to keep walking forward. And for once I was ready. I didn't expect anything from her anymore. Not a phone call. Not an apology. Not even a moment of understanding. By the time a few months had passed, I had settled into my new rhythm so deeply that my old life felt like something I had read about in a book, not something I actually lived through. Most days were simple in the best way. Morning walks near the river. Quiet meals in my kitchen. Afternoons filled with the mentorship program, listening to young folks tell me what they wanted out of life, what scared them, what they were secretly hoping for. Evenings on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the world soften into dusk. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't need to be. Peace rarely asks for attention. Then one afternoon, I found a letter waiting in my small, rusted mailbox. Thin envelope. My name written in handwriting I knew better than my own. I stood there for a long moment just looking at it. A part of me thought I'd feel some jolt of pain, but instead, all I felt was a quiet curiosity. I walked inside, set the letter on my table, and made myself a cup of coffee before opening it. I didn't rush. I didn't brace myself. I just let the moment come. When I finally unfolded the paper, I could see she had written a lot. Pages full of looping handwriting, some words pressed too hard into the page, others faint like she changed her mind halfway through writing them. I read the whole thing slowly. She talked about being overwhelmed, about pressures at work, about feeling like she had grown into a person she couldn't always control. She said she didn't mean to hurt me, that the laughs, the dismissals, the things she brushed off so easily, she thought I understood her humor. She wrote that she loved me, even if she didn't know how to show it anymore. She apologized. Then she defended herself. Then apologized again. It was a letter torn between guilt and pride, between wanting forgiveness and wanting to be right. By the time I reached the end, the coffee beside me had gone cold. I folded the pages neatly, slid them back into the envelope, and walked to my bedroom. I opened the drawer where I kept old keys, receipts, a watch that didn't work anymore, and placed the letter inside. Not out of anger. Not out of hurt. Out of understanding. Because reading her words made something very clear to me. It wasn't that she didn't care. It was that she never really saw me. And she still didn't. Even in her apology, I was a supporting character in a story she was trying to rewrite. Every sentence was about how she felt, how she struggled, how she needed to explain herself. Not once did she ask me what my life looked like now. Not once did she imagine that maybe I had changed too. I closed the drawer gently and walked back outside. The sun was starting to set, throwing long streaks of gold across the river. That time of day always felt like the world was sighing, a deep, warm breath that loosened something inside me. I sat on my usual bench, listening to the water lap softly against the rocks. A couple of kids were fishing nearby, their voices drifting toward me in bursts of laughter. A dog barked somewhere across the street. It was the kind of evening that felt alive in a quiet way. And sitting there, watching the light dance across the water, I felt the truth settle in my chest with a kind of gentle certainty. Her rejection didn't break me. It freed me. Because for so many years, my life had been built around supporting her dream, holding everything together, hoping she would turn around one day and say, "I see you. Thank you. Now what do you want for yourself?" But that moment never came. And when I finally shared my dream, my small, simple dream, she treated it like a joke. Like something beneath the life she had built. That had been the moment something inside me cracked open, letting the truth rush in. I had spent years being loyal to someone who loved the version of me that served her, not the version of me that existed outside her shadow. And so I had walked away. Quietly. Calmly. With nothing but a suitcase and the last pieces of myself I still recognized. Now, months later, sitting by a river that didn't care who I used to be, I realized I wasn't grieving anymore. I wasn't replaying arguments or wishing things had gone differently. I wasn't hoping she'd change or wondering what I could have done better. I was living. My days had meaning that didn't depend on someone approving them. My time belonged to me. My laughter wasn't strained. My silence wasn't punishment. My dreams weren't dismissed. And this little town, this soft-moving, river-brushed place, had given me something I didn't even know I needed. A clean chapter. A new beginning that didn't ask for explanations. A life built on my terms. I leaned back on the bench, feeling the last bit of sunlight warm my face. A breeze moved across the water, carrying the smell of pine and fresh earth. Something inside me loosened one final notch, settling into place like it had been waiting for this exact moment. I whispered into the fading day, "I'm okay." Not loud, not dramatic, just the truth. And the strange thing was, for the first time in decades, I actually meant it. I didn't need to send a letter back to her. I didn't need to rehash the past or justify my choices. I didn't need to defend the life I had built since walking away. Sometimes silence is not avoidance, it's closure. Later that night, I stood by my window, looking out at the lights reflecting on the water. My little home felt warm. Alive. My heart felt settled, not heavy. That's when it truly sank in. I wasn't living a half-life anymore. I wasn't waiting for someone to hand me permission. I wasn't trying to fit into a world that had stopped welcoming me. I had created my own. And in that quiet, steady truth, I realized something else. Rejection can look like loss, but sometimes it's liberation dressed in painful clothes. Alana's dismissal, her mockery, her disbelief in my dream. They had pushed me into a life where I finally got to see myself clearly. A life where I could breathe. Grow. Matter. A life that felt like mine. The sun rose the next morning like it always did, lighting up the river in soft oranges and pale pinks. I stood there watching it, hands resting gently on the windowsill, feeling something warm rise in my chest, a gratitude I hadn't expected. Not for the pain. Not for the years I spent lost in someone else's orbit. But for the fact that I survived all of it. And I didn't just survive, I rebuilt. Piece by piece. Moment by moment. Breath by breath. I stepped into a future I didn't think I'd ever have the courage to claim. And now, standing in that sunrise, I felt more alive than I had in a lifetime. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.